Good evening, everyone. Hi, good evening, and welcome. My name is Rabbi Hilly Haber, and on behalf of our clergy, staff, and community, welcome to Central Synagogue. Thank you so much for joining us tonight to learn from author and activist Bill McKibben, a leading voice in our country and in our world on issues of climate change, sustainability, and justice. We are honored to co-host tonight's program with the Jewish Climate Action Network, Adama New York, and the Jewish Youth Climate Movement, Dayenu, a Jewish call to climate action, and the Religious Action Center of New York. Please stick around after the program tonight to meet the incredible leaders of these organizations and learn more about the work they do to ensure that Jewish communities in New York and beyond have the political, spiritual, and organizational tools we need to effectively respond to the climate crisis today and to imagine a different future for ourselves and our children. In Genesis, we learn that we belong to God's divine blueprint for the world. We are connected to one another and to the planet by vast webs of relationship that shape our ethical and spiritual obligations. We are made to care for one another and for the world around us. Our speakers tonight will help us sharpen our understanding of our place in God's world, reflect with us on how we are falling short, and give us new hope for the future of our planet. It is now my honor to invite up Central Board Trustee and member of the Central in Action Leadership Team, Devonna Cohen, to formally introduce our speakers for tonight.
Thank you, Rabbi Haber, and thank you to all our supporting organizations. And thank you all for joining us today. As Rabbi Haber said, my name is Devonna Cohen, and I'm very grateful to be here to introduce you to our speaker, Bill McKibben, and our moderator, Rabbi Jennie Rosenn. Bill has dedicated so much of his life to the causes of climate and social justice and accomplished so much. I'm thrilled that he is able to share his insights and experience with us. His words come at a time when so many of us are wondering what can we do in our congregations, in our communities, and in our homes to nurture a healthy planet. Some of you in this audience might be organizers, volunteers, or are simply passionate about the planet or climate justice. Some of you might be seeking information, concerned for the future for yourself or for your family, and seeking something, looking to do more. I was fortunate that as I sought to turn my concerns and anxieties into meaningful action, I found a community at Central Synagogue, a community already engaged in the important work of advocating and organizing. Through the community at Central Synagogue, I'm able to work with organizations like RAC New York, Adama, and Dayenu, all motivated by Jewish values. In my professional life, I'm the Chief Investment Officer at the UJA Federation of New York, so I'm deeply familiar with how our values call us to action to create a better world. I hope today helps to inspire you and remind you how much each and every one of our contributions matter. And that's why I'm so happy to introduce Bill McKibben today. At a time when many are struggling to stay engaged with the challenges we face, when some institutions hesitate to stand firmly against attacks or defer to authority in ways that may seem reckless or harmful, and when so many passionate, caring individuals struggle to find ways to translate their concerns into meaningful acts, Bill offers not just a powerful example of moral clarity and activism, but has organized to help others join collective movements as well. Through his organization, 350.org, Bill created the first global grassroots climate campaign. He has harnessed the energy of ordinary people to build something extraordinary that we all need, a world powered by renewable energy that is accessible and affordable to all. More recently, Bill helped found Third Act. This organization helps organize activists and volunteers over the age of 60 into a powerful movement dedicated to climate and racial justice. Bill has written nearly 24 books over the decades of his career and has been honored for his lifelong work, winning, among other accolades, San Jose University's John Steinbeck Award for embodying Steinbeck's empathy, commitment to democratic values, and belief in the dignity of people who, by circumstance, are pushed to the fringes. These are the very values many of us understand to be inherent in our shared faith and community. I would also like to introduce Rabbi Jennie Rosenn, our moderator. She founded and serves as the CEO of Dayenu, advocating to address the climate crisis through Jewish values and calling for bold political actions. Rabbi Rosenn has also served as the vice president of HIAS, working to address the global refugee crisis, and rabbi to the Columbia Barnard Hillel. We're thankful to have her join us and interview Bill today. I'm especially grateful that Bill has generously agreed to meet with the teenagers from the Central community and the Jewish Youth Climate Movement, offering his wisdom and hard-won experience to the upcoming generation who need our dedication and support to ensure the future. These young activists dedicate their time and energy to the necessary collective action to combat climate change, both today and tomorrow. I'm sure you are all ready to hear from Bill. So once again, thank you all for joining us today. And let's give a big heartfelt welcome to Bill McKibben.
Fantastic. Great. Well, thank you so much for that introduction, both of you. What a pleasure to be here, and what a pleasure to have gotten to start off by talking with all the young people who are doing remarkable work. I was telling them that when I wrote the first book about what we now call climate change, what we then called the greenhouse effect, back in the 1980s, a book called The End of Nature. And at that time, there was no religious environmental movement at all. In liberal congregations of all faiths, the environment was regarded as something, a kind of afterthought after poverty and war, and something we'd get to someday. In conservative, small c, conservative congregations of all kinds, the environment was regarded as a kind of way station on the road to paganism, you know? So it was difficult to find anybody who wanted to do this work. But some of it, and I was telling them, some of the very first of those were a group of wonderful Jewish environmentalists, friends of mine, called Shomrei Adamah, that arose and did remarkable work. And since then, there have been many successors, the Coalition on Environment and Jewish Life, COJOL, and now Dayenu, where I have the great pleasure of getting to be a sometime advisor, and where Reb Jennie and everybody else is just doing astonishing work. This religious environmental movement, which in some ways had its beginnings here in the Northeast with Shomrei Adamah, with people like Steve Shaw up at JTS, others, it's now become a crucial part of faiths across the planet. And I will just say today that we lost perhaps the most important environmentalist and faith leader in the world in Pope Francis, and I feel deeply bereft and forlorn at his passing. A remarkable human being who did remarkable work. And if you have never read his encyclical Laudato Si', you should. It's the most thoroughgoing critique of modernity that we have, and a really important document. Look, I'm going to be depressing for 3 or 4 minutes here, because to understand the scale of change that we need to make, we need to understand the scale of trouble that we're in. And we are in a lot of trouble, just to get through it bluntly, frankly, and quickly. When I was writing that book back in 1989, I think the years that I was thinking about turned out to be 2023 and 2024. Because in the last 24 months or so, we've seen these steady and dangerous ramp up in temperatures turn into a very sharp spike. And we're now in deeply, deeply uncharted territory. beginning in about June of 2023, month after month after month, we have set the new record every month for the hottest August, the hottest April. We just set the record for the hottest March that we've ever had, narrowly beating out March of 2024. The temperatures now on this planet are not only the highest that we've ever measured, but because scientists are pretty good at finding proxy records for figuring out what paleo temperatures were like, we're now convinced that these were the hottest temperatures in at least the last 125,000 years. 125,000 years ago was when people started etching symbols on bone, okay? So no society or civilization that we would begin to recognize has lived on a planet as hot as this one. And the results of that are precisely what scientists were telling us. You've seen the scary and vivid short-term demonstrations of that, the incredible floods across this planet, the remarkable fires. The house of my earliest boyhood memories in Altadena, California, burned down on day 2 of the big blaze out west. But you know, the things that happened in LA or in Vermont, where I live now, where we've had tremendous flooding, they're bad, but we, A, have cameras to take pictures of them, and B, have enough money for the moment to kind of make them good. Not true in the rest of the world. When the flooding in Vermont, where Sue and I live, abated in the summer of 2023, it began in North Africa, and within a couple of weeks, the biggest rainstorms in the history of that part of the world, rain on a scale you can only have on a globally warmed world where a warm atmosphere can hold more water vapor, produced flooding in, say, Libya, enough to take out the 2 big dams on the main river, which then smashed into a coastal city, which then washed 10,000 people out to sea where they drowned in an hour, okay? That kind of thing happens with astonishing regularity in the developing world. And what makes that so painful is that these are places where nobody did anything to cause this problem. All of Africa's put 3% of the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. The 3% of us who live here, call ourselves Americans, have put 25% of all the greenhouse gases in the air. Nobody, not the Chinese, will ever catch up with us. And it's all still up there, the stuff that came out of the tailpipe of my family's maroon Plymouth Fury when I was getting my learner's permit in the 1970s in the suburbs of Boston is still in the air, that CO2 trapping heat, okay? So it's now reached the point where we're doing fundamental damage to basic systems on this earth. The jet stream has begun to behave extraordinarily erratically because the temperature differential between the poles and the equator is much less than it used to be as we've melted the Arctic. The Gulf Stream is beginning to flicker because so much fresh water is pouring off a melting Greenland that it's upset the dynamic of the way that the great ocean currents work. We're doing the deepest possible damage, and we have, and this is the important thing, very little time to deal with it. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, our scientific body that understands this for us, has told us we need to cut emissions in half by 2030 to have some hope of staying on the timetable we set out in Paris just 9 years ago. 2030 by my watch is 4 years and 8 months away, so not a great deal of time, even if everybody was working in good faith. The difficulty at the moment, of course, is not just physical, it's political. We now have the most powerful nation in the world working in very bad faith in all of this, doing its best from day one to quash clean energy and promote not only oil and gas, but now coal, as if we were in 18th century Britain. Not only that, we're busily firing everybody who's been studying the climate. We're even shutting down the the buoys and satellites that measure the damage that we're doing. It's like a heist picture where they're spraying black spray paint on the cameras to keep anybody from seeing what's going on. Tomorrow, we expect that the Trump administration will try to remove the tax exemptions from climate groups around the country, trying basically to stop the alarm from going off, to keep people from paying witness here. So, very, very difficult period. All right. I've done my due diligence here. I've told you the trouble, and now I'm going to be much, much, much more sanguine. Because I also think that right at this exact same moment, as if in a Hollywood script, we also are presented with the means of our physical redemption here from this crisis, to the degree that that's still possible, okay? What's happening right now is that thanks to great scientists and engineers around the planet, the cost of replacing coal and gas and oil, the thing that drives the climate crisis, has suddenly become not just affordable, but eminently desirable. Sometime in the last 3 or 4 years, we crossed some invisible line where the cost of producing energy from the sun and the wind became less than the cost of producing energy by burning coal and gas and oil. We live on a planet where it is the cheapest way to make energy is to point a sheet of glass at the sun. That is a remarkable moment in human history, but we need to get it through to people. We have spent so long describing this as alternative energy that has stuck in our head, and we think of it as the Whole Foods of energy. It's nice, but pricey. It's not. It's the Costco of energy, okay? It's cheap. It's available in bulk, it's on the shelf. And in the places where we're starting to really make use of that, we see unbelievable things happening. California's done more than any other state, and they passed some kind of tipping point in the last 14 or 15 months. They've now got enough solar panels and enough batteries on that grid that as of last weekend, they're producing most days way more than 100% of the power they use during the day from renewable energy, which means at night, most of that power now is coming from batteries that have been storing up sunshine all day. California in 2025 is using 44% less natural gas to produce electricity than it did in 2023. In 40 years of working on this problem, that's the single most optimistic statistic I have heard. It is by no means confined to California. Last year in Pakistan, right on the Chinese border, not because of any government action, but just because there was cheap solar panels available for people to import, Pakistanis put up the equivalent of 50% of their national electric grid in new solar panels on the roofs of people's houses and factories and workshops. The biggest adopters were farmers. Those of you who've traveled in rural Asia know that the soundtrack of that part of the world is the diesel generators running the irrigation wells to pump water up, the sort of green revolution technology that made the Punjab and the Sindh and places into bread baskets. But that takes a lot of diesel and it's expensive. Farmers were early adopters here. Most of them lacked the money to build the metal supports for these solar panels. They're just laying them on the ground and pointing them at the sun. Pakistan used 35% less diesel last year than they did the year before. These are big numbers. If we can spread these around the world fast, then we have a chance not to stop global warming, too late for that, but to stop it perhaps short of the place where it absolutely cuts civilizations off at the knees. Again, we have a short window to do that. If we had 50 years, no problem. Economics would take care of this. Sun and wind would win out over time. We do not have 50 years. We have 4 years and 8 months, okay? So we have to move. And that's what I'm going to very quickly tell you about the sort of plan we're at work on to see if we can speed things up a little bit. You know that this last weekend, or actually officially tomorrow, is the 55th anniversary of Earth Day, which was an important occasion. The biggest demonstration in American history. 20 million Americans, 10% of the then population out in the street. Enough, and there are a couple of people in this room old enough like me to remember this, enough that within 2 years, a corrupt Republican administration had nonetheless given us the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, and the EPA because they had no choice. There was just too much power out there demanding change. That's what we have to do. So we are hard at work, not on Earth Day, but on Sun Day. It hasn't been officially announced yet. That waits for a week or so. But I'm giving you, since I'm here, I'm telling you about it, and you can feel free to tell a few others. As I say, it takes advantage of the fact that we've got this surge, but it's not going fast enough yet. We have to increase the pace by about 50%. And so we need to call on people. Here's just a couple of pictures, one of them from just down the street in 1970 at that first Earth Day to remind us what happens when people get together. So that's what we're going to do on the weekend of September 20th and 21st. And when I say we, I mean you. We need everybody figuring out what to do in their communities, because this is going to be dispersed across the country. We need parades of e-bikes and EVs. We need people organizing everybody with solar panels in their communities to put green lights in the window that night. We need people pushing their communities. Here's one that New Yorkers can really work on. In Germany last year, people put up 1.5 million installations of what they're calling balcony solar, hanging solar panels off the railings of apartment balconies, and in many cases producing 25% of their energy that way. That's illegal in most of this country because you need all these building permits and fire permits and stuff. We need that not to be the case. We need city halls around the country saying, in the emergency that we're in, we need to move on this now. And so there may be some of you who we need to do a little guerrilla installation of those solar panels on your balconies to make that point that day. That's the symbol that we're using. That's the logo, okay? Because it's half a sun because we're halfway there. We have the science and the technology. And it's beautiful science and technology. We need now the political will to make it actually work. So the first task, and this is the easiest one, is for you all to go, and you can do this already, to sunday.earth, and complete that logo for us. Do a little drawing. The tool there is beautiful, and people have been coming up with amazing, amazing versions of this by the thousands and thousands, and we're using them. There'll be, as we launch the website, a crawl of thousands of these beautiful things happening. There's the one that Jane Fonda did for us last week, just to remind us of the possibilities. And this is what I really want to get across. There is one sense in which renewable energy is a kind of techno fix, you know? It's a different technology to replace things. A better one because it uses far less stuff. Yes, you have to mine some lithium and some cobalt, but the amount of mining is minuscule compared to what we are doing now. In fact, there was a study in the fall saying that all the mining we would need to do between now and 2050 is smaller than the volume of coal we mined last year on this planet. All right? And if you think about it for a minute, it makes sense. If you mine lithium and you put it in a battery, there it works for 25 years, every day doing its thing. If you mine coal, what do? You set it on fire, and then the next day you have to mine some more. So this makes huge sense, all right? But that's not the only reason that this is beautiful. The other reason is that it allows us to imagine a world where the other kind of power works a little differently too. Right at the moment, since we depend on coal and gas and oil, which are available only in a few scattered deposits around the planet, the people who happen to control those end up with way more power and wealth than they deserve or can use responsibly. Hence, the Koch brothers, our biggest oil and gas barons who used their winnings to degrade our democracy. Hence, Vladimir Putin. Hence the King of Saudi Arabia. Imagine a world instead that runs on energy that is available absolutely everywhere. The sun and the wind blow across this planet, shine on this earth every day. And now we have the batteries to store them when the sun goes down or the wind drops. It's a different world that we have a chance of creating, a way that we can leapfrog over much of the trauma that we deal with now and imagine somewhere better. And that's why it was fun, particularly talking with the young people here today, to say, grim as things are right now, and if young people have climate anxiety, there's good reason for having climate anxiety, you know. Grim as that is, there is a future that we can imagine that works much, much better. We need you to help make that real. Reb Jennie, you're the embodiment of that, so let's sit over here.
Thank you, Bill.
I'm just going to pull it out.
Yeah.
Here.
So I'll just start by saying Bill and I actually both grew up in the town of Lexington, Massachusetts, which is having a moment, 250th anniversary of the start of the revolution happened in our town. And I mention that because we're in a very particular moment in American history and in global history and in Jewish history. A fairly hazardous one, as you heard. And I have to say, every time I hear you speak, I learn something new. Bill, as you can tell, is a masterful communicator. And I would invite you all also to sign up for his newsletter. So you can hear very complex ideas in very compelling and accessible ways. So where are we in the history of the climate movement? You ended your remarks talking about people power and what we need to do to unleash renewable energy power. But that's going to take a fair amount of political people power. And the climate movement is also in a very particular moment right now. So tell us a little bit about that.
Right. Well, I mean, one of the weird things about the climate movement is that at some level it shouldn't have to exist, you know? I mean, we got fair warning about climate change. It's, in some sense, shouldn't be a political problem. It's just physics, you know? Turns out that the molecular structure of CO2 traps heat. We should be getting rid of it, you know? And in a normal world, that's the work we would have gotten down to. In our world, where the fact that the fossil fuel industry had enough money to game our political system now for 30 or 40 years and to overwhelm it with misinformation has made that hard. And so we've had to build this movement to try and force some action. I do think that this movement's in a different place than it's ever been before, and that's because of this technological change. For most of the time that we've been working on this, fossil fuel has been cheaper than clean energy, and so much of the work of the climate movement has been to try and drive up the cost of fossil fuel, carbon tax, whatever it was, to try and square that equation that way. Now that's no longer true. Now it's about, now we should have economic wind at our back, and now it's about trying to figure out how to speed this thing in the direction that it now wants to go, I think.
Everybody, you were saying, needs to be part of this. And everybody needs to. We have a colleague at Dayenu, Muriel McDonald, who had worked with Sunrise for many years, and then she had a moment where she was like, I need to go get my people. And for her, my people were Jews. And so clearly every community needs to go get their people. And every individual has something to bring to the movement, right? If you're not someone who takes to the streets, you make spreadsheets, or you raise money, or you make the sandwiches. Everyone has something to contribute. So faith communities, religious communities, interfaith coalitions, what's the special added value? Let's talk for a few minutes about what's the special added value that not just Jews, but people of faith, communities of faith bring to the movement?
Well, I mean, look, if any of you don't know the work of Dayenu, you should, because it's an absolutely exemplary, I very much enjoy being the Methodist advisor to Dayenu. But they're doing work just of extraordinary high level in mobilizing the Jewish community and the sort of things adjacent to that, the politicians that come out of the Jewish community, the financial resources that come out of the Jewish community, and making them, getting them in moving in the right direction. One of the high points of that work, I will say, was the great moment when the Reform denomination divested its financial assets from fossil fuel. And Jacob and everybody else who made that happen we're very, very proud of. And it's been remarkable work. Faith communities in general bring with them a kind of moral clarity that's really important here. Because the scientific argument ended long ago about climate change. The economic argument is large, we're winning, but we need somehow to be reaching people's sort of visceral, whatever half of the human brain it is that doesn't rely so much on reason and data. That part we should have won by now.
We call it the kishkas.
Exactly. The visceral part that responds to faith, to music, to art, to all those human signals around love and caring, that very much needs to be mobilized. And most of the time it needs to be mobilized for a series of tasks internal to each community that we're in, making sure that congregations are putting solar panels on the roof or whatever it is. But sometimes, and these are some of those times, we need to be able to bring everybody into coalition around a particular thing for a particular moment in order to provide enough heft to really make change happen. So that's the moments when we're so happy that we have not just Dayenu, but we have Green Faith, of which Dayenu is a supporter, that brings communities from the Christian community and the Hindu community and the Muslim community and everybody else together, and why we're wonderful that we can link them up with with all the scientists who are now out in the street, and with the secular climate movement, and with the public health movement, and the climate justice community movement, and the frontline communities around the country and around the world, so that we can come together and do things like Sunday that provide enough momentum to make all our work easier back in particular congregations and whatever. But the role of religious groups in providing a kind of baseline moral clarity is really important, and that's really key. We don't need Dayenu or anybody other religious group explaining to us the science of climate change. That's been done. We need to be talking about what we need people to be reading Psalms and talking about Job and making the case from the heart about what needs to change.
We often say that the climate crisis isn't just a political, ecological, social justice issue, it's an issue of the soul. And there are, I think one of the reasons people don't engage more is they don't know what to do, right? They need strategic pathways.
Yep.
I also think it's just so overwhelming,
Yep.
like to imagine what
Yep.
the world will be if we
Yep.
don't make significant change. And so I think it's a very natural response to look away, to get busy in our lives,
Yep.
to watch Netflix, to do all the things
Yep.
that take care of our families. And so part of the work I think that faith communities have is also spiritually resourcing people, the pastoral piece, the making space for all the really hard feelings that come up, to cultivate active hope, to move into courageous action, and with that moral voice. And one of the things you started to talk about, what is the world that we want to create? What does that look like? Which takes a kind of moral imagination. And I wonder where moral values fit in and where religious communities, what are the values we're going to center in that world we're going to create, right? Because we could all imagine a world that, and you started to talk about this a little bit around the political underpinning of the fossil fuel industry and renewable energy. So what would it mean to center religious values, faith values, Jewish values at the core of what that world might look like?
Can I talk about Job for a minute?
Yes. That was
Okay.
an on-ramp.
So I'm the furthest thing from a theologian. I've never risen any higher in the Methodist hierarchy than Sunday school teacher. But I did write a book about the book of Job once upon a time, because it's my favorite book. Old Testament, New Testament, Apocrypha, however testament you want. It's my favorite book in all of them. And for those of you who've just forgotten for a moment, it's the story of poor Job, who finds himself afflicted, living on a dung heap at the edge of town, covered with oozing sores. All his family and his flocks have died. He spends, it must be said, 37 extremely dull chapters complaining about this at great length with all his friends. I think you could breeze through those in a minute, because the action heats up at chapter 38, where God appears, speaking out of a whirlwind. And there are better scriptural authorities here than me, but I believe this is the longest speech that God delivers anywhere in the Bible, is the speech from Job. And it is definitely the most beautiful, and it is the first piece of great nature writing in the Western canon. It's just a tour of the natural world, and he's talking about, my wife gave me the Stephen Mitchell translation of this 40 years ago, and it really changed my life. And it's a translation I recommend to everybody. But it's incredibly beautiful and unbelievably sarcastic. God is taunting Job the whole time. Who are you? Why are you complaining all the time? If you're so smart, you tell me. Do you know where I store the wind? Can you whistle up a blizzard? Do you tell the proud waves where they shall break and no further? And Job, after listening to this for 2.5 chapters, Job is just like, sorry I asked. Do you mind if I sit down? He's realized that he's small in the face of this extraordinarily large universe. And it's for him, enough, Our problem is that that's no longer our position. For the first time in our history as a species, we're now very large, so that we are overshadowing everything around us. When God asks us that question, we can basically spit in his face. Do you tell the proud waves where to break? Yes. We're going to determine exactly how high the sea level gets and what's underwater in the course of this century. We're already doing it, And so for me, the interesting moral challenge becomes, in a way, how to figure out how to make ourselves a little smaller on this world, so that we're not dominating everything around us. And that's one of the reasons why I love solar energy and wind energy. They're very different, They supply plenty of power, but it's different because it's the power that's coming. It's energy from heaven, not from hell. It's what we're given every day by the world around us, by the creation that we're blessed to be a part of. And so I think these are deeply different emotional and moral connections to the world that result from the technologies that we're making use of. And I love the idea that just as human populations may get somewhat smaller as this century goes on at some point, so may our impact on the world around us begin to get a little smaller. That someday the amount of carbon in the atmosphere will start to come down. And the patterns of the world that existed as long as we've been alive as a species will begin to reassert themselves.
Thanks. When you were talking about moral voice, I was thinking about something that many of the organizations here were involved in right here in New York. We have a governor who is really grappling with the climate crisis and with what the role of her leadership is, what the role of the state is, what the role of the national political moment is. And we had a letter that we wrote to Governor Hochul around cap, trade, and invest to release the draft regulations. And it was signed by 150 clergy people from around the state. And that's actually what got the attention. We got some tweets afterwards, right? It was not the usual. There's certain people you'd expect. She was not expecting 150 clergy folks. So I think of that as sort of a very tachlis, a very concrete example of sort of the power of moral voice. And it brings us right into this question of state and local work. So, many of us here in this room worked on the Inflation Reduction Act and passing the historic legislation, billions of dollars to invest in clean energy, hundreds of billions of dollars. And this is the very same money that is right now Trump and his folks are trying to claw back. And we're working really hard to try to hold that. And it also then becomes a moment where what happens on the state and local level could not be more important.
Amen.
So talk to us a little bit about how you're thinking about national, state, local.
So right now, I mean, we're going to try and save as much of that IRA money as we can, but it's very clear we're not going to be doing anything good in D.C. for the next few years.
We thought it was going to be the floor. It's actually going to be the ceiling.
And it'll be that, and that ceiling is being pulled down as we speak, and it's grim. That makes it all the more important that we do the right thing at the state and local level. And it's worth remembering that New York State is the 10th largest economy in the world, okay? So what happens here is of extraordinary importance.
And one of the biggest emitters.
And we could be doing a heck of a lot more in New York. I mean, the New York Heat Act is up now and needs all the boost that it can get. In New York City, Local Law 97, retrofitting buildings for efficiency, because buildings are the biggest source of emissions in New York, is absolutely crucial. The current mayor is not perhaps doing all that he can to make it as robust as possible. But you know, New York at the moment is in the position to just have a sense of, to be able to glimpse what new worlds actually look like when you make change. This is Sue and my first visit to New York, a place we know very well because I spent many years here writing the Talk of the Town column for the New Yorker. It's our first visit back since congestion pricing was passed, and man, that's everything that everyone said it was going to be and more. You can just feel it walking around the city. I read the other day that something like 30% fewer people have been run over in New York so far this year. That's a good thing, Not running over people is a big plus, just on top of the fact that we're not pouring stuff into the air in the same volumes and so on. So we're at a moment when we can sense real possibilities. We just have to keep nerving up our leaders to let them stand up to, and it should be easier here than most places, because New York is blessed by the fact that it does not have an oil and gas industry, thanks to the extraordinary work of New Yorkers who blocked fracking in this state 10 years ago. And lots of us worked super hard to make that happen. And one of the payoffs is that we're not fracking, and the other payoff is that there's not the same political difficulty that there are in oil and gas states. So Governor Hochul has no excuse for not being better than she is on these things, And it's really important for New Yorkers to get this done right now. So thank you for all the work you're doing here.
And when you said giving, you said nerving her up. In Hebrew, we say chizuk, giving strength. And so much of the work right now is around giving chizuk to leaders in states that have, New York, California have forward-facing policies, but how do we actually give the chizuk for our leaders to
And one way is we
make it
hold
real?
up people who are doing that in places where they are. One of the people who's really been doing some interesting stuff in the last couple of years is the governor of Illinois, Governor Pritzker, who has strong connections to the Jewish community in Illinois. And his work on things like solar siting around Illinois has been remarkable. So that's a good way to kind of remind our leaders of what they should be living up to.
It's courage on some level. We're just yesterday or the day before, depending on your tradition, closed out the holiday of Passover. Passover, right? We retell the story of leaving Egypt, leaving Mitzrayim, or literally like the narrow places. And there are a lot of instances in the story where we needed courage. We think about Shifra and Pua, the midwives who rescued the baby boys who were born. Or we think about the famous story of Nachshon stepping into the Sea of Reeds.
Yes.
Or just the Israelites leaving the place they knew to go into the wilderness for a land they didn't know. All of this took tremendous courage. And the Israelites are told throughout, in various points, by other people, by God, chazak ve'amatz, like have strength and courage. And I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about times where you have felt like, wow, Bill, this is going to take some courage, and where you drew that from.
Well, let me just say to begin with that the only commentary we need on the Moses story is we don't have 40 years this time. It's got to go faster. So that's the, I don't know what the Hebrew for speed the heck up is, but that is what we need at this point. But it's a great story. Look, the courage. I mean, there are things when you build movements and whatever. There are things that happen. I've been to jail many more times than I would have guessed I would. But that's. I think sometimes we tend to focus too much on that, and less on the kind of the movement building is mostly mundane and prosaic, as you know, and it involves endless lobbying and organizing people to do, Facebooking and, on and on and on. Just the quotidian tasks of building and occasionally there are moments when we have to, rise to the occasion and so on. But the work is really just to stay steady and strong and to seize on the opportunities that get presented. And right now we have this extraordinary opportunity. Just the fact that all of a sudden, we have available the thing that we need. That's such a extraordinary gift, and to waste it would be. That's what feels to me the hardest thing right now. It's like for 40 years I've known how hard this is because it was hard. Now it's not hard. Now it shouldn't be hard. And if we waste it now, then what are we?
Where are we? So one final question before we wrap this portion, and you will hear from Bill again at the very end. So don't worry. Everyone in this room is here because they're concerned about the climate crisis. So, 3-part question. What would you want people to know, to think about, and to do?
I think they're all the same question in a way. And I say this sometimes. The American default in all things is towards the individual. That's just who we are. And probably at this point to a fault, we'd be better off being, and in this case, that's especially true. The most important thing an individual can do is not to put a solar panel on your roof, though if you can, that's really important and a way to quickly drive down your own emissions and help a lot. But the most important thing an individual can do is be less of an individual. Join together with others in movements large enough that we can actually change the zeitgeist and then the ground rules here. So that means joining Dayenu, or if you're young, joining the Jewish Youth Climate Movement, or whatever it is, and doing the work that they have skillfully set out to do. And then it means making sure that when big moments come, Dayenu and the Jewish Youth Climate Movement and everybody else join together with everybody else in coalitions large enough to really seize the political system by the scruff of the neck and give it a bit of a shake. And that we can only do if we work together. So to me, that's the thing that we need to know. Much more important than understanding all the intricacies of the physics and chemistry of climate change is to understand those basic notions about power. The only way to beat the mighty and the few is when the small and the many get their act together and coordinate enough to make change happen.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bill. That's actually a beautiful segue. As you know, this whole event is brought together by Dayenu, Adama and the Jewish Youth Climate Movement, RAC New York, Central Synagogue, and JCAN New York. And so I want to invite up Shachar Sadeh, who's going to introduce some of the teens who have some more questions for you, Bill. Come back.
Okay.
Shachar.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's so nice to see so many of you and be in community with you. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you, Bill and Jenny, for such a thought-provoking and honest conversation that and the ability to remain hopeful and inspire us despite the moment that we're all in is really reassuring and truly motivating. I'm Shachar Sadeh. I'm the director of Adama New York. At Adama, our mission is to cultivate vibrant Jewish life in deep connection with the earth, and we believe in the deep connection between people and planet, Adam and Adama. In New York, we catalyze culture change and systemic change through climate action. We support institutions in adopting climate action plans, Jewish institutions such as Central Synagogue, who are leading the charge on this, as on many other fronts. We are doing Jewish environmental education, but for today, the most important thing I want to highlight is youth empowerment. We have the Jewish Youth Climate Movement, which they are combating climate change and environmental injustice from a Jewish lens. They seek to center collective climate action as a vital expression of what it means to be Jewish nowadays. We have 12 active chapters in New York and growing, including one here at Central Synagogue. And I encourage you to reach out and learn more about the wonderful team that make up this movement. Our teams have met Bill for a pre-event session for an inspiring and empowering discussion. And I want to invite our next gen representative, Danny Greinker and Leo Pelavin, to ask a few more questions.
Okay. Thank you so much for hosting this and for being here today. We really appreciate it. Thank you, folks, for coming. We're going to ask a couple questions. I should introduce myself. That's a good idea. I'm Danny Grinker. I live in northern New Jersey. I go to the Heschel School on the Upper West Side, and I've just gotten involved with JYCM this past year. It means a lot to me. I've already found myself being super active and feeling super connected to it.
Yeah, and I'm Leora or Leo Palavin. I've been in JYCM for about 3 years. This is even my second time here at Central. I was here a couple years ago doing a training for a bunch of youth, a bunch of y'all who've been here before. And I'm really excited to keep going in the climate movement. Do you want to ask the first question?
Yeah. So, Bill, or Mr. McKibben, Dr. McKibben. As somebody who has been in the climate activism world for a few decades now, starting post-1980 election, with the election of Reagan, how has the movement changed, specifically concerning this narrative of personal responsibility and individual action versus collective action, as you were talking about before?
Yeah, I was thinking about that the other day, because I can remember at the very beginning of things back in the 1980s or the early 1990s, there was a kind of obsessive level of detail about individual action. And people would obsess about things like paper towels. Should we use those, or cloth, things like that. And at a certain point, people began to understand that there were deep limits to what individual action could accomplish. People who were still unsure about that, we really learned some of those answers during COVID. In March of 2020, all of you will recall that we changed our lives in ways that no environmentalist could ever have imagined legislating people to change their lives. Nobody went anywhere. We basically shut everything down. And emissions did fall, but they only fell about 9%. At the very height of all that, which I think was the sort of proof that rather than being a series of bad individual decisions that we were making, that most of the climate damage was the fact that we are part of a huge machine that's running on coal and oil and gas, and that we have to figure out how to reach into the machine and grab out the coal and oil and gas and stick in the sun and the wind and the batteries while the machine is still running. Not an easy thing to do, but a plausible thing to do. And I think that really helped us understand that it wasn't plausible to imagine that the real issue here was somehow convincing 8 billion people to have a entirely different set of desire. That'll come in time. 100 years from now, we will have moved past high consumerism and humans will have figured out more interesting things to do. But that's not going to happen in 4 years, okay? So in 4 years, what we can do is build an incredible number of windmills and solar panels.
Yeah, thank you.
And sort of from a different lens, in your many years of organizing, you've helped lead many campaigns like Do the Math campaign with 350.org, organizing against the Keystone XL pipeline, and the Step It Up campaign. At JYCM, we are currently running our Underwrite Earth campaign, which is trying to mobilize Jewish and non-Jewish youth, as well as Jewish figureheads, to call on insurance companies to stop insuring fossil fuel projects, as well as educate the broader public about the fossil fuel insurance industry. One challenge of running a campaign is the difficulty of breaking through to those who are not already in our movement. How have you succeeded in doing this in the past, and what advice do you have for activists running campaigns like ours today?
So these are very, very good questions. You have to somehow capture people's imagination in some way that lets them pause for a minute and think anew. And the insurance campaign is a brilliant example of how important that is. Because insurance is something that literally no one ever wants to think about if they don't have to. It's boring and depressing, okay? But it also turns out to be, and you've chosen one of the most important things in the whole world. And so you have to figure out a way to tell the story so that people can understand that. So here's how, when I talk about insurance, here's how I try to do it. We can't do any of the things that we are used to doing in this world if we don't have insurance to help us. It's by some measures, the single biggest industry on planet Earth because it's the thing that allows us to deal with risk, all right? And it put forth one of the most important and in some ways remarkable human inventions there ever was, the actuarial table. This piece of technology that allows us to predict the future in actionable ways that let us build buildings, mortgage, all the sort of things that people do. The only problem, and here's, I think, the way that I tell the story, the only problem with the actuarial table is that at some level, it depends on the world operating in the future more or less as it has in the past. And when that's no longer happening, the way that it really isn't now, we begin to see this system break down. That's why premiums for house insurance are going through the roof everywhere. So the insurance business, this is not their fault that that's happening. The part that's their fault is they're continuing, as you guys are pointing out, to make their own situation and all of our situation worse. They continue to underwrite all the stupid fossil fuel projects that scientists have told us to stop doing. There's only 6 or 7 of these companies that are capable. If you want to go build a pipeline someplace, you cannot start to build the pipeline until you have insurance. You're not going to have your bulldozers out building things until someone's written you an insurance policy. And there's only 5 or 6 companies in the world that do that business, you know? And so if they would stop doing it, we would be in a different place, and they would be helping salvage the technology that lies at the bottom of their incredibly profitable industry before it gets destroyed, before the actuarial table just becomes a useless thing. So figuring out ways to kind of tell the story so that people can take it in, and this gets much easier now that everybody's insurance premiums are going up, up, up. If you can, you know, one of the things that people older than you worry about a lot is the fact that their insurance premiums went up 20% last year. And if you can use that as a springboard to getting them to understand why change is crucial, then you have someplace to go, I think. But just to sort of bring it back to the question of what is insurance? What does it mean to think about risk? That's powerful.
Do we have time for one more question? Okay. Can ask?
I just want to say, relating to your point about telling the story, we've been really focusing on really highlighting this narrative of hypocrisy from the insurance companies, of a corporation that's supposed to ensure your safety, but is also sort of undermining that by not mitigating risk.
It's a beautiful way to do it.
We've been making a lot of memes about it. So if you want to go look, every single Monday, JYCM posts memes that help you understand the fossil fuel insurance crisis. So
go look at them and then help spread them around. That's what memes are for. Yeah.
As youth organizers who make memes, how do we facilitate intergenerational dialogue while balancing both deference to authority and the opportunities that it brings us, along with our sort of like youthful energy
Yes.
and more radical goals?
Yes.
And on a similar note, how do we speak to audiences of all ages while maintaining the fact that as youth, we will be most affected by the climate crisis?
These are very, very good questions. And I'm going to answer a little bit, not on behalf of all ages, but on behalf of old people like me, okay? We've spent the last few years organizing this thing called Third Act, which now has about 100,000 Americans over the age of 60. We've got great working groups, including one in New York, that really is doing amazing stuff on all these legislative issues and so on and so forth. I think you need to remind older people that they have a particular responsibility and possibility here. Look, one of the reasons we started Third Act was because when my friend Greta was doing her amazing organizing among youth and it was catching on everywhere, it was fantastic. I love working with her. She's one of my favorite people. The only thing that bummed me out was that I heard too many people my age say, oh, it's up to the next generation to solve these problems, which A, is obviously immoral, and B, is obviously impractical, because you guys may grow up to be great senators and CEOs, but you're not going to do it in the next 4 years. You've got to go to college and whatever. There are 70 million Americans over the age of 60, okay? We have 70% of the country's financial assets. We punch above our weight politically because we all vote. There is no known way to stop old people from voting, okay? And so taken together, we should be able to be a big help to young people, and that's what we've tried to. I was telling these guys a story earlier about the very first demonstration that we did at Third Act, and we did it because young people asked us. They said, we want to take on, in this case, not the insurance companies, but the big banks, Chase, Citi, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, that are the 4 biggest funders of the fossil fuel industry. And they said, we want to take them on, but we don't have credit cards or checking accounts or anything. Can you help? So we said, okay. And I remember going to the first demonstration in Boston, and there were several hundred high school kids there. High school kids completely understand the barrel of the gun down which they are staring, okay? Completely get it. There were a couple hundred high school kids there. They are somewhat more nimble than people our age, so they were at the front of the march, okay? At the back of the march, there were a bunch of us from this nascent Third Act with a banner that said, fossils against fossil fuels, okay? And so that, I think, is the spirit in which to do this. You do not need to be the all-knowing, all-seeing boomer who, understands and explains everything to everyone at all times. You can just be a merry part of this and figure out what you're good at. We did when we got to really like this bank stuff. So we had a day a year later when we had 100 demonstrations in 100 cities. I was in D.C. where there were a few thousand of us there. We wanted to shut the banks down for the day, but we've reached the age where sprawling on the sidewalk for 4 or 5 hours is less fun than it might once have been. So we went to the Goodwill and we got every single rocking chair in the greater Washington area, and that's what we shut down those banks with. The Times had a big story the next day about the rocking chair rebellion that was underway. So figuring out how we can back people up is a big part of what we do. And you can make this much easier by explaining to your grandparents over and over again how cool you will think they are if they do the right thing.
Thank you. So, in these final minutes, we are talking about multi-generational movement building, and we're talking about coalitions and working together, bringing all different communities and theories of change and ways of working together around key campaigns. And so I want to invite up Ben Elkin from RAC New York, who has a charge for us. I'm then going to hand it back to Bill to give us a final word of inspiration. And I want to then invite everyone here to spend some time in the back of the room with the tables from materials from all of the organizations here, so you can learn more and also can sign up for all sorts of ways to get involved. So with that, I'm going to turn it to you, Ben, and then go right into Bill for a final word.
This on? Great. Hi, Ben Elkin, lead organizer for RAC New York. We're the Reform Movement's advocacy and organizing arm, working with 99 congregations across New York State. Some of you know what the deal is, and you're already scanning this QR code. I'm going to just really quickly present an opportunity that we all have right now to take action on a very timely issue in the state of New York. So first of all, state of New York. I want to talk about why that's important. Bill, Rabbi Rosenn got at this, that the state of New York, just as a state unto itself, has a hugely disproportionate impact on the issue of climate because of the size of its economy, because of the amount of emissions that the state puts out on its own. Those are some of the reasons we know that New York matters. Another reason we know New York matters as a state has to do with some of the recent developments at the federal level. So just 2 weeks ago, the White House put out an executive order that specifically opposed state overreach when it came to climate policies, and specifically identified policies that have been coming out of the state of New York and that are currently in consideration in the state of New York. We know that New York matters. We know that what we do here in New York State matters. And so this QR code, what lies behind it, once you take out your phone and scan it, is an opportunity specifically to reach Governor Hochul on a particularly important piece of policy, something called Cap and Invest, or Cap, Trade, and Invest. This is one of the big policies in New York State right now that is going to be part of the overall puzzle of getting the state on track to meet our larger global commitments around climate change. It puts a cap on greenhouse gas emissions. It reduces that cap over time. It charges companies that want to pollute and put greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere that want to do that. It charges them a certain amount of money to do it, and it uses that money to fund all the stuff we're going to need to do in New York State to do a climate transition. Things like implementing electric vehicle charging stations, for example. This specific policy and its version in California was one of the policies that was named in the the White House executive order 2 weeks ago as not good. So we know right now that Governor Kathy Hochul, who has the power to move this particular policy forward, is going to be hearing from folks in our state, hearing from the White House that she should not do it. And we have 150 people in this room. How do I know that? I counted. And if we all right now take the opportunity to scan this QR code, you can send a message, thanks to our partners at Dayenu, that encourages her to move forward with the cap, trade, and invest policy. So thank you all very much. All right, I have one more task to do, which is to invite a photographer to quickly take a picture. Oh, okay, great. I don't know.
Okay, so everyone take out your phone. Raise your hand if you've taken the action. Amazing. Okay, so everybody's gonna stand up, if you feel able, and we're gonna take a photo. We're gonna try to get the whole room. And this says actually what Ben was just saying. Governor Hochul, fund climate justice. So we're gonna take a picture with this. And then this photo is going to be representative of the great power of our movements. Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, if folks want to reach across the aisle, get together, everybody looks so good, everybody smells so good, let's get closer. Can I recommend a resource? Don't be late to see. I'm going to do a countdown. Ready? All right. 1, 2, 3. We're going to move the other way. 1, 2, 3. And maybe a lower angle. Everybody else. Gotta get everybody in. Okay. 1, 2, 3. How you doing over there? Perfect. Yeah. All right. Thank you all. Thank you all.
Everyone can take their seats. I just want to invite Bill up for a final word.
Well, final word is only to say extraordinary thanks to everybody here at Central Synagogue for all that you guys do. Extraordinary thanks to the young people here who are showing us how it's done. And extraordinary thanks to all of you, because I know that at the autumnal equinox on September 20th and 21st, there are going to be some excellent pictures coming out of the Upper East Side, and we're going to see some beautiful things happening up here. So many thanks for all that you do. We've got a chance. We've got no guarantees. That's what makes it interesting. So on we go.
A big thank you to Bill for your words and inspiration.